I'm Scott, and this is Alitza, and we're going to talk to you today about Esri maps for SharePoint. Just a quick survey, show of hands. How many people are currently using some version of Esri maps for SharePoint? Ooh, not very many. And the rest of you are here just to kind of find out what it is. You use SharePoint in your organization, you want to figure out. Excellent. Well, we have a good overview for you today. This is not an in-depth technical workshop necessarily. It's going to give you an overview. We are going to do some demos and show you how things can be set up, but it's not going to dig into the minutiae. So I think this is going to be great for this audience. You guys are going to get to see what we have to offer, and then you can always dig in and find out more. So I want to start at the highest level. I want to start, you've probably heard already this week about this WebGIS thing. This concept that they went over at plenary, and GIS started way back in the day as just desktop based. You worked with files on your computer, you worked in your GIS system that was a program on your computer. That was kind of the early days. And then we moved into a little bit later days where your GIS devices connected to a server, databases, Arc server, whatever it may be. That was kind of like the mid-tier. I think a lot of people are still there, but we're moving towards this vision that we have at Esri of a web GIS, a GIS that's available to everybody throughout an organization on whatever device you've got. So it might be desktop. You might be creating things in desktop and publishing them to the web and then picking them up on a mobile device. You might be creating things on a mobile device or editing them with things like Collector and altering the data that's stored up in ArcGIS and the WebGIS that would then be available to everybody else throughout your organization. And I really want to drive this home, and I really want to make sure that this is clear because Esri Maps for SharePoint is integrally a part of WebGIS. Once your data is up into ArcGIS, the WebGIS system, you can pull it into SharePoint. And that's kind of what we're going to show you how we do today. So why would you, as a GIS professional, care about this WebGIS concept? It's because it can really expand the reach of what you do to everybody throughout your organization. For example, in my past experience, when I've been out in industry, not working at Esri, there's been a GIS department in the organization, and then there's been the rest of the organization. And the GIS department kind of does their own thing, and they do it really well, and they do some awesomely powerful stuff, but it's not necessarily accessible to the rest of the organization, the non-GIS people, those people. They don't have access to GIS, and WebGIS and Esri Maps for SharePoint is a way to get that data out to them, to get your reach out across the organization and to become even more influential across the organization. So I'm stepping down a level here from that WebGIS high-level concept. One way to interact with that WebGIS is by using apps. And we have a whole bunch of apps. And hopefully you all saw the plenary and saw my colleague Jean give a really nice summation or a metaphor of what our apps are like. She likened it to a symphony, where when you get all the apps working together, it makes this beautiful song. And so apps for the field workers, which I'm showing here through like Navigator and Workforce and Collector, they were kind of embodied by, let's say, like the woodwinds, and they had their own tune. And then the horns were the community apps, the ones that were used by the community. And when you put all these apps together and you configure them in the right way in your organization, it makes this beautiful melody and this beautiful symphony. So I thought it was a really nice metaphor, so I just kind of wanted to hit it again and kind of give you that idea that there are many different types of apps on the platform. Some of them are built by Esri. Just like this one, Esri Maps for SharePoint is an Esri-built app. Some of them are not built by Esri, and you can buy them from third-party vendors. But there are tons of apps out there, and we classify them a couple different ways. Like I said, apps for the field workers, they're for people working out in the field, collecting data, sending it back to the platform. Apps for the community are things where you can actually interact with the community. You can either put data out there in the open data space so that people can download it and have access to your stuff, or you can do crowdsourcing type things and collect data from them. But what we're here today to talk about are apps for office productivity. And apps for office productivity are really geared towards the every person throughout your organization. They could be the Maps for series of products. They could be ArcGIS Earth or Explorer or any of the number of the other apps for the office that we have at Esri. So let's talk about what are apps for office productivity. We think of them as apps that raise the productivity of individual office workers by giving them this new set of tools. We think that they have to be easy to use. We think that they have to be able to be used across the organization, from the C-suite all the way down throughout the organization. They need to be able to be that easy and that accessible. They need to be able to enable people to have quick insights into what they're seeing. They're seeing data potentially in a whole new way. Like, we're GIS people, we see maps all day, every day. Sometimes they become a bit routine for us. For people that don't deal in GIS all the time, even simple visualizations can provide these aha moments. And so it's about enabling those aha moments through simple mapping. And finally, it allows us to communicate our ideas. It allows us to communicate throughout the organization. And so that's what this set of apps is all about. It's about enabling better geographic insights using geography. It's allowing them access to this new set of things that they didn't have access to before. So there are a number of maps for products. And so all of these are business integrations or business system integrations. And so just like Maps for SharePoint is an integration into this existing system called Microsoft SharePoint, we also have integrations into other business systems such as Microsoft Office through ArcGIS Maps for Office. We have integrations into Cognos and MicroStrategy. So if you guys have these other business systems as well, we do have integrations, and I encourage you to check them out too. So now that we've kind of run down from the top level, what is WebGIS? What are apps? How can we use apps throughout our organization to get things done? Let's talk about SharePoint. It's time to talk about SharePoint now. So how many people would consider yourself very familiar with SharePoint? Okay, great. That's awesome. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, like what a site page is or what a site collection is, but let's just say that since you already know probably what a site page is, that's our starting point. So if you have a site page, we can add a map to that site page. You can use site pages, as you know. It seemed like there was widespread knowledge of what SharePoint is. SharePoint is a kind of a jack of all trades. It can do just about anything that you want it to do. It can be an external web server, or it can be an internal document management site, and anything in between. But what we really focus on is we focus on these SharePoint pages, and we focus on adding map visualizations to those pages. We also focus on lists and geo-enabling lists within SharePoint. Is everybody familiar with a list? Raise your hand if you're not familiar with lists. Okay, a couple people, okay. So a list is basically like a table. It's almost like a spreadsheet in Excel. Don't go too far with that analogy, but it is just a way to store data within SharePoint. And a lot of people store data within SharePoint, just raw data within SharePoint, and lists are the way they do it. So it's not necessarily a document, but it is a object within SharePoint. So just kind of putting that out there. And those are the two things we work with. We work with site pages, we work with lists. And the biggest thing that we do is we really allow you to geo-enable your lists. So if you have that data stored in a list within SharePoint, if it has any kind of location information, whether it be zip code, city, state, address, if you have the lat long, that's great too. We can geo-enable that and make it available to be mapped onto a map within your SharePoint page. So our map on that SharePoint page looks like this. So you can add that as a web part onto your site page, and then you can load your geo-enabled list data onto that map. So pretty helpful so far. But it doesn't really stop there. You can also bring in data from ArcGIS. So that's to me, one of the really powerful things is that you might have a bunch of data in SharePoint, but you also have a lot of data, presumably, like looking at the audience, your GIS people, you're probably working with ArcGIS, you probably have a lot of data there too. So if you have data coming from other systems, from ArcMap, people working on desktop, whether you have people out in the field, or even if you just want to work with Esri provided data, we provide a whole suite, a whole ton of data. that you can bring in and add to these maps to get new reference layers to contextualize your data coming out of the SharePoint lists. So all of that stuff can be put on a map and made available to your users via SharePoint. That's essentially what Esri Maps for SharePoint is. We're done. Thank you. Goodbye. So digging a little deeper, Esri Maps for SharePoint integrates with SharePoint in 5 basic ways, but I want to make sure we understand a little bit about what this graphic is over here on the right. So behind SharePoint, in the back end, there are servers and there are connected services and there are things going on under the hood for SharePoint. I'm sure some of you probably already know this, but that's kind of what makes SharePoint go. But to the end user, they don't usually see any of that stuff. They'll see through their desktops or their web browsers or a mobile device, they'll see an interface kind of like the one I just showed, where they'll have a visualization of things. And so we work in both of those areas. For visualization, we have 3 main integration points. We have our Esri Maps web part, and that's the one that I was talking about and that I showed just a second ago. It's the one that goes on your site page. We also have an Esri Maps location field. So if you have geo-enabled a list, you can drill into that list. You can click on a row and go into it and look at that data. Well, whenever you do that, you can also see it and configure an Esri Maps location field. So you will actually see where that point is, just that point on the earth. And you also have the opportunity to edit that location. So if it geocodes it to a particular place and you want to move that point just a little bit, you can do that editing right there as well. So that's one of our ways to integrate into SharePoint. And we also allow for extensibility. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you want to really customize this thing, you have the ability to do that, and you do that through the web part. So the next thing I want to talk about are workflows. And those are things going on in the background. Those are the back-end processes that work to geo-enable your lists. So the Esri Map locate workflow works directly on lists. So you can configure it so that it will always be watching, like it'll do that initial geocode, it'll geo-enable all your data, and then it will continue looking, if you set it up to do so, it will continue watching that list for additions or edits or modifications, and it will keep that list up to date with the right geometries and the right information. So that is really a pretty powerful thing. It keeps your SharePoint data that is potentially always updating, always living, always moving, up to date and geo-enabled, and if you've added that to a map, your map's always going to be up to date. So you can take that same concept and apply it to not just lists, but you can also look at external databases, primarily through, I think it's SQL Server. SQL Server is one of the main, yeah. You can always also connect, if your data is in SQL Server, you can connect to it through this Esri Maps Connect workflow and bring your SQL Server, your geo-enabled SQL Server data back into your web part so that you can visualize it on your map. So that's a high-level rundown of the 5 major ways that we integrate into SharePoint, mostly about lists, mostly about web parts and visualization. So this is just kind of showing you an example of what a list is. And so we're talking about these workflows going on behind the scenes. I've got 2 rows in this list. I've got one titled Esri with an address of 380 New York Street, Redlands, California. That's where I work. And we also have a La Jolla row showing its address and city and state. And so once you have this location information, again, like I said, it could be a lat lon, it could be fully qualified address, it could just be city, state, it could be custom geometry. We can handle just about anything you throw at it. Once you have these, you configure a workflow, it does its geo-enablement in the background, and it adds a new field to your list. And it actually stores that information right there inside your SharePoint list. And so that geometry information is yours, you own it from that point forward, and it can be used to do any kind of mapping you want. So that is an overview of what the locate workflow is, and now for an actual demo to show you how that works, I'm going to kick it over to Alitza.
Okay, I bet most of you have already heard about Brexit, just a couple of days back, United Kingdom, there was a referendum held where the majority of people voted for United Kingdom to leave the European Union. That caused a lot of excitement and drama. The Prime Minister Cameron announced his resignation. The exchange rate of the British pound dropped significantly. And there are various sources that said that behind those votes, the majority of people that actually voted for leaving were the elderly as well as the middle to low educated. So I would use this as my topic for today's demo. What I'll do is I'll show you here the Electoral Commission has published the EU referendum results data in a CSV format. So I'll just click here on the link and I'll save this data on my desktop. I'll also show you the data that I'll be using. In this case, in ArcGIS Online, I have a feature layer which simply contains the polygon of all those voting areas within United Kingdom. When I click on a given feature, you'll notice that it just has three pieces of information. The first is the ID, the second is the voting area name, and the third is the region where this voting area is located. So once I have my CSV data in my feature layer that I would use to map those results against, I would go to SharePoint. This is my SharePoint server 2013. We have our Esri maps for SharePoint 4.1 installed on it. And the first thing I'll do is I'll say I want to add an app. Then I would go all the way to the second page. Let me just close this one. And in here you would see there is an option to import spreadsheet. I would give a name to my list that I'll be creating in SharePoint, and I'll be browsing to the spreadsheet that I just downloaded from the website where the results were made available, publicly available. I would click now Import. It would spin up Excel, and I would select a range of cells. And when I click this button, it would allow me to import all of this data into SharePoint. Oops. Okay. You can see at the bottom, it's adding the records in the SharePoint list. It will just take a split second. And when it's done, it will take me to the list that I just imported. Here it is. It contains 380 records for all of those 380 voting areas in United Kingdom. You would see that it contains information such as the area codes and the areas, as well as how many people voted for United Kingdom to remain in European Union versus people to leave, people who voted to leave, as well as some other information there, which I don't really need to demo for this demo. But then the next thing I would do is, now that my data is there, I would want to add a workflow to this list. To add a workflow to the list, you click on the top. There is a list tab. Here, under workflow settings, I would click add a workflow. There is a bunch of workflows that are available by SharePoint, but one of them is Esri Maps Locate. This is our Locate workflow. It allows you to geo-enable not only lists, but also document libraries. So I'll give it a name. And now leave the defaults. Now go next. You'll be presented with the Esri Maps Locate workflow wizard, where you can use some of the out-of-the-box locators that we have for you, such as the world address geocoder. Depending on where you are within the world, we also have some place name lookups that you can use. And on top of that, you have the ability to add custom location types. In this case, I would want to use the feature service that I had in ArcGIS Online as the locator. So I'd say, okay, I want to add a new location type. I would search within my organization, and I would say, okay, the layer that I'll be using has the tag vote. This is my UK counting areas layer, and I would click select. What happens right now is when I geocode, we will be making queries to this feature layer based on a given field for a record in my list. It would fetch the corresponding geometry and bring it back into the SharePoint list. I would click next here, and I would say, okay, which is the column which is the field within the feature layer that I would want to use for my geometry matching, and it's PA_name. I'll give this locator a name, UK voting areas, optionally a description, and now I can actually go ahead and geo-enable my SharePoint list using this newly added locator. It would ask me which column within my SharePoint list I'll be using to fetch geometries from the feature layer, and it is a column called area. I would leave those as default, and I'll just click next here. And I want to also add some additional fields to my existing SharePoint list. To do so, we have exposed the enrichment service as part of the Geocode workflow. If I check this checkbox here and click next, it would present me with a dialog for all the available variables that I have that I can actually append to my SharePoint list. Obviously, I know my data is in United Kingdom, so I'll scroll all the way to the bottom and select United Kingdom. And as I said earlier, there are two variables that I'm interested in. Those sources that I said quoted that it's the elderly that voted for United Kingdom to leave. I'm interested in fetching the age, the number of elderly people above the age of 60. So I selected one variable here at the top. And then the other variable I'm interested in is education. So if I select the education category, here there are various variables available, but the one that I'm interested in is people that have education of NVQ 4 and above, which is equivalent to Certificate of Higher Education. So I want to know of those people that voted for United Kingdom to leave, how many were actually holding some higher education certificates and diplomas. So it just lists here the variables that I have selected, as well as how much credits it would use to geo-enrich and geocode the data. And now click the button Add to my list. So you can see that it's already started to work on the workflows. But if I go back to my referendums SharePoint list, you would see on the right-hand side, it's in progress. It's going through the rows one by one and fetching the geometry. Oops. What happened? Okay, so the first canceled for some reason. But it's fetching the geometry as well as those additional variables that I was interested in. How many people over the age of 60 voted how many people over the age of 60 were in that particular region that voted to leave or remain, as well as how many people have higher education. So this would take, obviously it would take some time to geocode this list, but if I go to view one single individual item, you would see that a little map would show here for every single individual list item. If I click here to sign in into ArcGIS, already have my credentials there, it would actually display the polygon of the voting area in United Kingdom that was fetched from my feature layer in AGOL. So that was pretty much it for the workflow. You see it's completing them now. And I'll show you how to add this data into the map web part a little bit later. It's back to you, Scott.
Cool, thanks, Alitza. So, does that make sense? Does everybody kind of get what was going on there? We went out and we geocoded, geo-enabled some of the list data that she found online. Also added a few new fields to it. So it was actually not just geocoding, but it was actually geo-enriching as well. So we were adding new data into that list and combining it with what we downloaded from the web. So that's pretty cool stuff. I'm sorry, I heard a question? How did we get the polygon? Okay, sure, let's do questions. How did we get the polygon? It was from the ArcGIS Online service that she had. So we didn't show you how that we created those polygons. We just kind of said it exists on our ArcGIS Online account. It was created somehow. It could have been in desktop. We could have imported them from a shapefile from somewhere. But we published them to ArcGIS Online. And then they had those 3 pieces of information. And we matched from the data that she downloaded to existing fields within that service on ArcGIS Online.
So the polygons never in SharePoint.
After the workflow has executed, they are now in SharePoint.
Yeah.
So originally the data is on ArcGIS Online. Esri UK shared this feature layer. So as soon as I start geocoding for every single list item in my SharePoint list, it would go and say, okay, tell me which is the polygon in this feature layer that matches this specific PA_name field in the feature layer, and bring it into SharePoint. So from that moment, the data lives into SharePoint itself. It can be points, it can be just for this demo, it's a polygon, but of course it can be points too. Sorry? I did not start, no. It's a, what do you mean it started?
Yeah. For the example that I did a few slides ago, let me go back. So you see right there where it says spatial reference and then WKID, that new shape field. So that is storing point information. What she is doing is actually storing polygon information. So there's just a bunch of vertices. Like it would be a really long block of text. Cool.
It's both. It supports both.
Yeah.
As well, yes.
Yep.
So now if this map will be deleted from ArcGIS Online, SharePoint will still
Yes.
have this polygon. It's not dynamically each one time kind of bringing data into SharePoint.
Well, it depends how you set up your workflow. You can set up your workflow so that if new rows are being added to your SharePoint list, it would try to go and fetch from the service again the new polygon that you just added to SharePoint. So it would bring all the data from AGL into SharePoint, but if you want it to be continuously refreshing, then you should be leaving the AGL data.
So this workflow, I will need to create in Workflow Designer in SharePoint Designer, or it's part of
It's part of the package. So the moment you install our product, you would see it in the list of available workflows within the site collection for which you have activated our product.
Really good questions. Thank you. We definitely want to make sure you're understanding and tracking what we're doing. So thank you.
Do you want to leave the questions, the remaining question after the?
Yeah, I don't mind taking questions at all. I don't mind at all. But I do want to kind of keep focused. I don't want to confuse people too much. So let's.
Could you repeat the questions being asked?
I'm sorry. Yes, I usually try to
Absolutely.
do that. Sorry.
Should we repeat them now? Or?
Sure.
So basically the questions that we got is, does the workflow support only points? No, we support points, polygons, and polylines. The other question was, is this workflow part of our product, or people need SharePoint Designer in order to create those Esri Locate workflows? The answer is the Esri Locate workflows come automatically as part of our product. The moment you activate our product in a site collection within your SharePoint farm, you would have this specific Esri Locate workflow that I just demonstrated to you available, so you can use it immediately.
Yep. Good job. Good summary. So now that we've kind of talked about the back-end stuff, those workflows that are going on, I'm going to move to the front of house stuff, the visualization. As I mentioned, and as you've already really seen, the Esri Maps web part is the thing on the left. The Esri Maps location field is the thing on the right. I think we've covered that pretty well, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on that. Talking a little bit more about the web part and the functionality that you can get out of that. You can really use all of your organization's data, all of the base maps, web maps, feature and map services that you already have configured in your ArcGIS Online or portal organization. You can use all of that stuff within the web part. You can also use your geocoders and your routing services, and you can use geo-enrichment as well, as Ali showed us. And all of those things come together so that you can share ArcGIS maps and layers to your SharePoint audience. Again, getting back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this session, where you're bringing these new layers and these new maps and these things that people that just work in SharePoint might not have access to otherwise. Just to touch on a little bit between the named user thing, I know that's come up quite a bit. Named users do have more capabilities. But we also do make all of this information available to anonymous users. So if you want to roll it out to your organization of 50,000 people, not all 50,000 people have to have a named user account. I know that's been a blocker in the past. That's not the case anymore. You can set up these web parts so that they're available via guest access, and guest access users don't need a named user account. There are some restrictions that go along with that, but it is possible to do, and it's available. So. Some more things that you can do with the Esri Maps web part. You can filter layers using attribute values. So if you have, like for example, I know it's tiny, I apologize for that, but in the map that you're seeing on the screen there's like a yellow series of yellow dots and a series of green dots. One of them has like a P, one of them has an I. If I wanted to filter down that feature layer to just the green dots, I could filter that layer by I and only see those remaining on the map. So it's a way to kind of filter and do a little bit of light analysis at the feature layer level. You can also auto-refresh layers. You can set up the refresh interval so that if you have, if you bring in, let's say like a weather layer, you don't want just a static image of a weather layer that just sits there for the rest of its life. You want it updating continually over time so that you see the storm patterns roll through or whatever that you want to see because weather changes. Field conditions change. People will be out in the field updating things. This auto refresh layers is a way to do that. You can set it to refresh the layer every minute, every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you want it to be, so that you always have very near real-time information in your SharePoint site. You can also change pop-ups. You can search the map. You can do things like find nearby. You can search the map for points of interest. You can add, delete, and change feature geometries and attributes. So you can actually do feature editing if you have those capabilities. That is one of those things where you would need a named user account, and as long as you have the right permissions and capabilities, you could do that through Maps for SharePoint. Some more things. We do have some analysis capabilities in addition to the visualization stuff. You can create reports on your locations. You can find hot and cold spots. You can do find nearby. Non-GIS users love heat maps, so we have heat maps available for use, clustering, and you can also do routing. And this customization and extensibility is probably one of the most powerful things that you get as part of Esri Maps for SharePoint. You can do quite a number of things to change the look and feel of Maps for SharePoint. You can add and remove existing tools and behaviors. So we'll give you a set of tools out of the box that you can use, but if you don't even want your users to see them for whatever reason, you can absolutely rip those out. You can extend this by taking those out and only leaving the tools and behaviors that you want your users to have. If you want to simplify the experience or whatever it may be that you want to do, you can absolutely do that. You can modify the layout and selection colors. So many SharePoint sites don't look like the SharePoint site out of the box that we were looking at just a little bit ago. A lot of organizations will customize them heavily to look like their organization's SharePoint site. And so we allow you to change the colors and the look and the feel to more easily integrate into your SharePoint site. Also, many fields and many organizations need specific symbology. We provide a ton of symbology out of the box, but there are certain things that we're not going to have or that we're not going to have access to that mean something to you in your organization or in your field. And if you have those, you can absolutely upload those into Maps for SharePoint to make those available to symbolize things the way that they make sense to you and your organization. And the biggest one is that you can add custom functionality via your own tools and behaviors. You can write your own tools for Maps for SharePoint. One of the ones that I've seen that's probably one of the coolest ones, it's I think an insurance company has written a tool so that whenever they click on a feature, whenever they click on one of the points, it automatically goes out and it runs a risk assessment. And then it pops it up on the screen and it shows them what the risk score is for that thing at that place. And so that's all using their own data on their own back end, and they wrote that code themselves. And you can totally do that to customize this to do whatever you need it to do. You don't have to. We provide a lot of tools out of the box, and if you're just doing visualization, you don't need to worry about it. But there is that power and that extensibility there if you want to write your own tools or if you've got your own dev shop. So now that I've talked a bit about the web part, let's see it in action. So back to you.
Okay, so as I said earlier, the goal of this exercise today is to see whether there is absolutely any truth behind those speculations made that the votes to the decision to leave the United Kingdom was based off the elderly and the people who had medium to low education. So this is the list that I imported, and you can see that the workflow has completed for many of those items already. So you can see that I have also received the geo-enrichment data from Esri there. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add 2 columns to my list to represent those the data that I have here in numbers as a percentage, because I have the number of people that voted in a given area. And now I have the number of elderly people it's scrolling. I'm sorry, it's scrolling always to the left. I have the number of elderly people as well as I have the number of people with high qualification. I want to express those numbers as a percentage of the total. So what I'll do is I'll edit my list. I'll click on the top. There is a list tab. There is a list settings. I'll scroll a little bit to the bottom. And then there is an option to create a column in SharePoint. I would give it a name. It would be percent over 60. Oops. Okay. I would say that I want my data field to be calculated. And I would type in a formula. Basically, I want the elderly population. This is the... Come on. This is the field which contains the number of adults over the age of 60. And because I want it in percentage, I would multiply by 100 and divide by the total electorate for the given area. Okay, and I want that data as a number. Oops. Did my change take effect? Sorry, I just want to make sure it's number. Okay. I want my data to be represented as a number, and I would leave the rest as defaults. Okay? I would add one more column for the education. So I would make it calculated once again. I would say percent higher education. And now type in the same formula. Multiplied by 100 divided. Sorry?
You have to use the total voter. How many people vote?
Those were, yes.
To be scientifically accurate, yes. Let's just go with the demo. Just to illustrate a concept.
You have to realize that the data that's available from the, I'm just using the data that's available from the, the Electoral Commission. That was a CVS field, huh?
Do you have there a column with the total voter?
Yes, I could have put what should have been the best way. Esri has the total population as a variable. I should have put that one over. But I just assume that obviously, in order to be voting, you should be like you're part of the electorate, right? You should be over 60. So, all right. So here, so that I added the 2 columns that I needed to my list. So if I now go, I need to add a page. So I would go to the top here, to the little gear on the top right corner, and I would say, okay, add a page. Okay. So on this page, I would click on the Insert tab, and I would click on the Web Part button. And here in the categories, you will see that there is an Esri Maps category. And I will be able to add an Esri Maps web part to my page. SharePoint has this concept of edit time versus runtime. So in order for my changes that I want to apply to my map web part to apply, I need to actually go and edit the web part itself. And to be persistent, I mean. So the first thing I would do is I would rename this web part. Okay. I would sign in into ArcGIS. And now I want to add 2 pieces of data. I want to add a layer from ArcGIS Online. This is a feature layer that I have. It displays the exact same the exact same feature layers that you saw earlier, but just divided in 2 categories: the voting areas that voted to leave and the voting areas that voted to remain a member of the European Union. Then on top of that, I would add the SharePoint list that I just geocoded and geo-enriched. Okay. You would see that my data in SharePoint just has the polygons, so it all came in a single color. So I need to actually style this data to actually be able to make sense of it. So I'll click on the little, oops, sorry, let me do it again. There is a little, when I select a layer, there is a little gear icon that would appear on the right. If you click it, you have a couple of options here for every single layer. In this case, I just want to style my layer. And I want to style it by a column. So I'll just click on this toggle button. The field that I want to group by would be the percentage field that I just added. So I want to do the percentage of higher educated people. And what I would do is I would leave the groups to be numbers, because obviously it is percentage. I don't want categories. And the classification method, I would leave it to be equal interval, but there are other methods too. So if you know what your data is, you can actually choose natural breaks or quantile as well. The default number of groups would be 5, and I would leave them to be as is, and I would leave also the color lamp to be exactly the way it is right now, but you have lots of options there too. So now if I want to actually see how the educated people relates to the people who want to remain in United Union, I'll just click to remove all the votes here that all the votes for the people that wanted to leave the European Union, and then I would remove all the categories where people had okay, I would remove all the the two categories where we have the lowest number of people who have higher education and above. And you can see here on the little map that, oops, when I toggle the data layer on and off, those will pretty much overlap quite perfectly. So this is okay. That means that, okay, the statement that was made by one of the sources that the areas with the people with middle to low education voted to remain is valid, to leave, sorry, is valid. The other was the age category. So if I take exactly the same layer, I'll just style it a little bit differently to check the other, the other statement. % over 60. I would leave it to be number ranges, but this time I would make the classification to use natural breaks, which groups similar values and shows group differences. So I'd use this classification method this time, and I would increase the number of categories in this group, and I would change a little bit the color ramp. I would reverse it, and I would make it to be ascending. Okay. So if I remove all those categories where we have younger people, more younger people, pretty much the last two categories represent the areas where we have the oldest population. You see that obviously none of those categories actually voted, pretty much none of them voted for United Kingdom to stay within United Kingdom to stay within the European Union. Okay, so if I click now OK to persist my configurations, and if I save my page, you will see that every single time when I actually load this page, it will ask me to sign in. But that's not good enough. Many people want to be able to show this map that we just configured to lots of people within their organizations. We don't want them to be able to edit or change any of the data that we have there or style it differently. We just want to be able to share that with them. In order to do that, we can just enable guest access. If you again go to the top right corner and click on the little gear there, you can go to site settings. And there at the bottom, you would see a group called Esri Maps for SharePoint Administration. If you click on App Configuration, you will be presented with a page which allows you to enable and disable guest access. If I click to enable, it would ask me to provide ArcGIS credential to be used for the guest access. Here I will just provide one credential. And I'll click sign in. And when the page reloads, it would say that guest access has been enabled. Okay? And now I can obviously disable it if I decide to stop this functionality. But if I now go back to my page, it's here. You would see that at the bottom there is an option or continue as guest. So if I click here, it would load the map that we just configured. But the thing is that you will not be able to add data from SharePoint or ArcGIS, and you won't be able to style or persist your changes. That's it. Back to you, Scott.
Sure, we've got a question about guest access.
It seems like you configured it at the SharePoint organization site, and not just that one map specifically.
I
couldn't
So the
hear.
question was, it looked like you made that configuration change at the site level and not at the map level.
Yes, you're correct. It is per site collection, yes.
So any maps that I have confidential maps and then non-confidential maps, if I configure it that way, everything's open against access.
Well, no, you can control this via SharePoint security itself. In SharePoint, you can say which groups have access to which pages.
Cool. So, any other questions on that? One more.
Is there any way, if you want these maps that come up on the portal, the real-time SharePoint portal, you don't want to have to keep clicking it. You want it to just present itself. There's no way around that authentication?
That is a request that has been made as well by other of our customers, and I think it's in our backlog.
Yeah,
but,
definitely working on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you connect to ArcGIS server directly?
Can you connect to ArcGIS server directly was the question, and the answer is no. You have to go through Portal or ArcGIS Online. Yeah. So I think just a few more points that I want to talk about. So we looked at what web parts are, and we saw how this map web part worked. I just want to talk a little bit about what web part connectivity is. So when Microsoft made SharePoint, they made web parts. The idea was web parts are these tiny little pieces on a page that can work together with all the other little tiny pieces on the page. So like Project Home, that could be a web part. And the Documents browser, that could be a web part. And the Esri map, that could be a web part. And the idea was these things could potentially talk to each other. And let's say we had a web part that was a search box, and then we have a web part that's a list. The search web part could talk to the list web part and filter it based on whatever you're searching for. So we have enabled web part connectivity. We allow our web part to talk to lists. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that that functionality is there. So the Esri map can talk to a list and filter things down based on selections on the map. And yeah, I forgot to cue my arrows, but the web parts can talk to each other. And so, yeah, we have one question right here.
When you say web parts can talk to each other, if I have a list, is within that list, it's a list of links, and one of the links points to an ArcGIS Online map. Will it open up within a window within SharePoint?
You need to, if it is because in SharePoint you can have columns which are of type hyperlink or picture. If you do it this way, you should be able to click in the list on the hyperlink and it should take you there. But if you want, you can discuss this after the session.
Yep. So
Is that me?
Yep.
Okay.
We're going to show them how to actually do it.
Okay. So I would start here by adding a new page. Web part, connectivity. Okay, so in this case, I would click on the insert again, and I would say I want to add a web part. You would see that in this part section here, we have the lists which we have within the given site collection already available. That's out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality. So in this case, I would use the UK, the referendum list that we just created a second earlier. You notice that this list is very long. Obviously, that's not very user-friendly for a page. So what I'll do is I'll save this page as is right now, and I'll go back to the list itself. Where is the list? Here. And I would create for the list, I would create in the list settings option, I would create a view which would just show a subset of all of those columns within the given list. So I would just click create a view. I would use the standard view option, and I would call this view subset. And I would only select only some of those fields. Oops, I want to remain and delete, but nothing else, for example. Okay. And I would scroll all the way to the bottom and click OK. So this is the exact same list, but just a different view of that list, which has less columns, so that it's more user-friendly when you look at that. Now I'll go back to my page that I created a second earlier. Okay. And I would edit the page. And in this web part, which is the SharePoint list view web part, I would click Edit Web Part. And on the right-hand side, I would say I don't want to use the current view, I want to use the subset view. And I would click OK. So you see now I have much less columns visible to me, and that's more user-friendly. Above this list, I would want to insert the map web part, as this map web part. So I'll do what I did before. I'll click on web parts. In the Esri Maps category, I would select the Esri Maps web part, and I'll click the Add button. Well, with added below. Wow. Let me get rid of it. I deleted both. Sorry about that. Let's see. You have to be very careful with this cursor here. Okay, do it again. And I would save my page so I don't lose my changes again. Okay, that was the subset. Okay, let me save my page now. Come on. Page? It's not showing me the button. I cannot scroll anymore. Live demo. Okay. Okay, so I have my map, and at the bottom I have my SharePoint list. So let me go and connect those two web parts together. I'll go back again in Edit. I would first want to add a feature layer to my map so that whenever I select a feature on my map, it results in certain records being filtered in the list below. So I'll click to Edit. In here, I would add some data from, let me add it from ArcGIS. Okay. Okay. And now I want to tell web part connectivity pretty much that I want selection of a feature within a specific layer to be used is the trigger for the communication between the two web parts. So in the Esri Maps web part, I need to click on the little gear button on the top right corner. And in here, you would see that on the left, we can configure tools, behaviors, layout. In this particular case, the web part connectivity is implemented as a behavior. So when I go to behaviors, you would see the web part connectivity. And when I click again on the little gear, it would ask me which layer within my map web part I want to use for the communication between the two web parts. In these cases, it's the UK counting areas. And I'll just click OK. I'll give it OK again. Let me just minimize that a little bit for more space. Oops. And I would say OK on the map web part. So now I would connect both of them together via the list web part. Here, when I go to edit, there would be a button. In the context menu, I would have the option to connect, and I want to get filter values from the Esri map web part. It would ask me to map fields. So in this case, I want to map the field within my map, which has the voting area name, to the area field. You see at the back, you see that's the area field within my SharePoint list web part. I'll click Finish. And you see that the moment I did that, all the records disappeared at the bottom. So let me save my changes. Okay. So now if I come in my map, and if I click the selection tool, and if I click on a given, oops, I selected multiple. In case you select multiple, you need to click on this small little icon. You see at the bottom, it's filtering the given records within the SharePoint list. But if I want to just select one, let me just clear all my selections. I'll zoom in and I'll just select a given one single feature. It will just immediately show it at the bottom. So basically you can select multiple. If you select multiple, you need to click on the specific icon of which of the two records you want to display in the list web part. Otherwise, it would automatically filter it. This web part connectivity is bidirectional tool, so you can enable it so that if you click on a row within the SharePoint list web part, it would automatically select the feature corresponding to this row within the map web part.
And that is web part connectivity. And so that's kind of a good overview of what the current feature set of Maps for SharePoint is. And what I'd like to do now is talk about what's coming in future versions of Maps for SharePoint. We're really going to be looking at documents. That's our focus. We've kind of overlooked them up until now. We've worked mostly with lists and visualizing lists, geo-enabled lists. And what we're doing moving forward is we're really going to start paying attention to documents. We get that request all the time. People want to be able to geotag their documents. They want to take their documents, drag them onto, let's say, like an oil well or a railroad line or a pipe segment, and have that document associated with that pipe segment so that when you go back, you click on that pipe segment, you see all the documents related to it, whether it be the safety sheets, whether it be the schematics, whether it be whatever. It's going to be a really easy way to find your documents based on maps. And that's what we're focused on. We're building it right now. One other cool thing that we're going to be implementing is search SharePoint by feature attributes. So if you click on a feature attribute and its name is RL72, it'll execute a SharePoint term search for RL72. So everything within SharePoint that you have access to see will come back, and you'll be able to get into anything relating to that particular feature. So that's a general idea of what's coming. We're looking at that early next year, so we've still got a bit of work to do, but that's what we're focused on right now. We have exactly 0 minutes for Q&A, but if you want to hang around, we will be more than happy to take questions and answers. I'll answer anything that I can. So if you want it, you can download it. Just FYI, it is a free download. As long as you have ArcGIS, you can download it, put it into your SharePoint site. It's not like an additional fee or anything. And you can learn more at the doc link right there. So
I don't think there are any sessions after us, so it's okay. We can.
Yeah. We can absolutely hang out. So if you want to hang out and ask us questions, we'll be here. So